Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trifles. And today I'm going to talk about good books and bad books, or at least that's the idea. I'm not sure how well this will come out, but I was trying to figure out another topic for Book Trifles, and I asked a friend, another booktuber, and they suggested that I talk about books that are sort of well made and books that aren't, and the things to actually look for uh, or consider if you want a well made book rather than in something that will actually last or just a reading copy. So it's I've got a few things to illustrate here as well, but the technical aspects I'm going to fall down a little bit, especially regarding paper. It's sort of a thing that you get to know, or someone like myself, rather than knowing the technicalities of it, and and looking at the type of paper that was used, you get a feel for it, literally a feel, and the look of the paper. But anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. Now, we'll start out with paperbacks, and I just have an old one here to hand from 1970s, and it's still together. The pages are yellowing a little bit, and that's the one thing you need to look out is if it depends on the paper, they will yellow, and sometimes yellow very, very quickly. And that is bad because they are disintegrating, literally, the paper. And if it's a cheap cut of paper, if I can use that term, like a newsprint type, um, then there's a good chance that even within a few years, that paper will brown and well, tan and then brown, and it'll get to a point where it'll be actually brittle. Uh, I'm not sure if anybody has ever seen sort of old pulp magazines, because it was used as a pulp paper, and they have there's a high sort of acidic content, and there's other chemicals that went into that, but uh, the early ones can be quite fragile, because and it depends on how they've been kept, the temperature, and humidity. But a lot of them are almost turning to dust that you cannot turn a page; it will actually break. And I've had that happen in the past with books as well. So today, well, for a while they were starting to make books out of, with acid free paper, archival quality, and they'd usually have that sort of symbol, um, infinity symbol on it, on the somewhere, usually on the copyright page on the back of the title page. That is sort of falling out because publishers are trying to cut costs, um, and it depends. And this is the thing. That's where this becomes a little difficult because um, it depends on the publisher and country as well, but mostly on the publisher. But let's sort of well, with new paperbacks, there is a distinct lessening of quality for the paper, for things like even Penguin and the major publishers. They are downgrading the quality of the paper to save money. I'm guessing at that, but I can only that can only be the reason for this. Now, I'm sure they'll say something, oh, to pass on the cost to you, but no, it's to keep the profits, because the prices haven't gone down. It's their costs have gone down, and so it's hard to look at it. Like you look at, it depends on the paper. Just because it's sort of a creamy color paper doesn't mean it's yellowing, because there is cream paper. Uh, Pure white paper at the time may or may not be okay. There's a lot of variables here, but Paperback books, older ones are, I just saw one here that could be a good example. See that one, this one here is tanning a little bit around the edges, if you can see. Here's one that is quite brown throughout. It's got even worse. So, and that's the quality of paper and how it's been kept. And lots of foxing on it as well. Now let's just pop to hardcovers, and here's an older hardcover here. It's cloth covered, and this is the thing. There is a big difference between cloth covered books and paper covered books. Cloth, it's you usually can tell by you, if you look at it closely, you can see the sort of the grain of the cloth, the thread of the cloth. But they've gotten quite good to mimic that with paper. But with the feel of it, if you feel it after a while, and you'll know. And the reason why I say the cloth is better is it ages better. It will protect the book better, and it will age better, and they'll be less likely to have. A lot of times when you go to read a book, well, everybody has, doesn't matter, you wash your hands, you're going to have oils that are on your hands, and you're holding the book like this to read. You are depositing oils on the book. Now, with paper ones, you will notice at times, paper covered ones, you'll have stains on there. There'll be stains. They may not show up immediately when you read it. Sometimes they do, but then sometimes later is that you'll read the book, you put it back on the shelf, and then you'll look at it later, and you'll see the staining. Because it's sort of the acids and the oils in the finger have finally worked into the paper and caused blemishes to it. So it's very hard now to get cloth covered books, but I'll show you, like this one is cloth covered, and also to sewn. Now there are sort of gatherings of paper that are sort of two pages like this, double-sided. They're folded, and then they're put in gatherings, like however many pages, like 40 or 50. And the older ones then were sewn. And that makes the binding very, very strong and almost indestructible unless you destroy the threads. Now, I don't know how this is going to show up, but you can see the threads there. You can see the little holes, and there actually is the thread. So you can see that in a book. You can see the threads. A more modern book will sometimes have like, if you can also look too, you can, if you look at the top at the spine, it's not going to show up here very well, but you'll see those gatherings. But they do that with the new books as well. Newer books that aren't sewn. They're not sewn, but they are in gatherings, and they are notched along the back, and then it's glue that's put on, and they're called perfect binding, but it's imperfect binding because the glue will eventually dry and crack to the most part, or just even from the beginning, they won't hold up to really good aggressive reading. But yeah, and then I'll show you a more modern one. That's one that I bought new. This is the British edition of Orwell's diaries. It's a selection from the 20 volume set that Peter Davison did. And this was published by Harville Secker, and you see for the paper it says it's from mixed sources, and that generally will be a good indication that the paper is not going to be well made. And this paper is already browning, and here this is what I mean for there is no threads in there, and there's no sort of gatherings in there, and it's just basically they make the text block, and that's just the book part without the cover, and it's glued, and they could actually just put paper covers on it, paper wraps, or put end papers on it and then put hardcover. And here's an example of paper. This is paper, and this is cloth. It's not going to show up very well, but you can feel the roughness of this. But as I say, they are getting pretty good at making paper textured and to make it look and feel like cloth. Now, and you say, well, what's the difference? As I say, there's the staining aspect of your fingers on there. Hence, you can get something like if you are concerned about these things, and not everybody is, but if you are concerned about keeping your books in nice condition, and especially the dust jacket, you can get a dust jacket protector put on, and you can read it with the dust jacket protector. And this is plastic, so you can wipe it down after you're done, and no muss, no fuss. What else was I going to say? Oh yeah, like you see the corners here, like because this is paper. A lot of times books get dropped, or you drop a book at times, and if you drop it on the corner, it'll bruise the corners, and it'll sort of and when it's paper, it's more likely to break the paper. So then it'll show the board, the cardboard beneath. So paper covered boards are not as good and not as durable as the cloth covered ones, because if you drop that, you will get the bruise, but it's unlikely that you will get it'll break through unless it's really a bad drop, and then or just wear too rough. It's easier to rub through by a constant use through paper than it is through cloth, because cloth is more endurable. Now then you get these, like this is even an old book here. It's a hybrid. It's got quarter cloth for the spine, and the rest is paper. This one is really nice. This is from 1927. But you see, even the paper is foxing a little bit over time, but it's still quite nice. And when you compare it to this one, this is 95 years old, and look at the condition that it's in, and it's been read many times. And you look at this, the Orwell one, which is only 13 years old, and it's already browning more. There's a bit of foxing on that, but this in another 20 years will be completely brown, and chances are it'll fall apart when you go to read it. Now, there's the other thing. There's other types of coverings too that I always say to try to avoid it if you can. They may look really nice, and this is something that they're doing, is they're naked hardcovers and they're printed. This one's not so bad. This is I think this is a paper that it's covered, that it's printed on. But you get other ones that are plastic. They're plasticized. You see, you can see the shine on it. That's plastic, and that will easily crack, and it'll actually have a smell to it as well. But they did those long time ago too. Here's an old book from the 30s, an H.G. Wells Oddmans, and this is vinyl, and it does have a smell, and there was lots of vinyl covered books. Now, there's a lot of publishers that do that now, and print on demand. When you go to hardcover, they will. It's basically the same text block as the paperback book, but then they put this plasticized cover on that is, and it's poorly put on. It's sort of like this. This is poorly made, and a lot of British publishers It depends. Again, it depends on the publishers, but even like through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of their books, like public dozens of publishers, British publishers, the paper is brown now. It's browned, and you can't really get a copy that the paper is not almost disintegrated on them. They're still readable, yes, but if you care about these things, this is aimed at somebody who cares about things like that. And it's fine if you don't, and it's fine if you do. You know, um, and even new publishers, British publishers, are doing this. So if there's a book I want, I will tend to try to find a the American edition. Sometimes it doesn't have as nice a cover on it or the jacket, you know, but it's better. It's better made. It's more well made. And getting back to cloth, there are publishers who are doing cloth. Like let's just pick for instance the two, Oxford and Penguin, big publishers. There's the Oxford Classics cloth bound. It's a very, very thin cloth. It's extremely thin. You can tell by the feel of it that it's very, very thin. And then the lettering and the design, which are usually quite nice, are printed on it. But they're printed on very, very poorly. And they will come off in your fingers. They are not really meant to be read because you can't really read those too many times. They're made to look pretty on the shelf, not to actually be read. But then you get something like the Folio Society as another one that is made to be read. They're sewn. They're generally on acid-free paper, and the cloth is really good. They still don't do. They still print the lettering on the cloth, but it's a better printing than say for instance the Penguin or the Oxford. There's the Oxford um, hardcover classics as well, and again they use inferior paper, and it's the design, even though there's not much of a design, is printed and the letters are printed on the cover. So that's the saving grace, that those can be read, and you could probably avoid your fingers onto the title on the front cover and on the spine, and sort of save that part of it. But the paper will turn brown, and I've got a couple that have done that, and that's literally less than 10 years that's happened. Um, just trying to think of what else. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of other publishers that do these fancy looking things like the Barnes and Nobles. They call them leather bound, but the quality of the make of those are very, very poor. People buy them because they like the look of them. That's debatable. It's up to each person. I think they're a little too gaudy. There's another publisher, Flame Tree Press, or publishers that do the plasticized sort of covers with really, like, as if it's gold embossed or silver embossing on it. And then they can get really intricate covers, but they're not well made, and especially the Barnes and Noble ones are very poorly made. The paper's poor, and the leather, they call it leather, but it's probably only like 50%, if that, leather. There are additives to it, and it's a very, very microscopic, almost thin layer of leather on that's used for that. And if you do take it off the shelf several times, you're rubbing against other books, it'll rub off, and the corners of them they'll start wearing off the leather, and you'll see sort of a brownish or an off-white layer beneath, because it's so thin. And yes, people do buy them. Again, these are made for on the shelf to look at, not to be read, because generally they're not made well enough to be read continuously. The older ones were better, but now they're getting again. It's all the publishers. Anything new stuff is a lot of times not well made. Like in the past, something like this would have been a cheap edition, and there's other ones that were cheap editions that are 100 years old that still stand up. And there were cheap editions because they were cheaper in price. There was less quality taken to the binding and the materials, but they're still far, far better quality of books than they are today. So yeah, so there's I don't know if that's been helpful to anybody. I thought it was like a good idea when it was suggested to me, but then I started thinking, how do I go about doing this? And I don't have perfect examples for everything. But yeah, it's like it basically. If you want a book to last, look for things like certain publishers that do stuff correctly, sew and binding, um, cloth covered boards, and if you can get um, the acid free paper, and the true test of it is to buy an older copy of something that's 10, 20, or 30 years old. And if it's still holding up, then that's really good. If you buy something new, it's sort of like you're almost buying a pig in a poke, I think it's called. It's like you don't know quite what you're going to get. Um, so yeah, and so happy collecting or reading. And if you found this helpful, do let me know in the comments, or your thoughts on other publishers that do things well. And you see, the thing is, it's kind of weird, the sewing part. Publishers don't, most the major publishers don't do this anymore, and it's weird because you get these cheaper publishers that publish public domain stuff like old classics, and you'll get them using sew and binding. So their binding is a lot better, because when you get a book like this that you can open up like this, and it stays like this, and you could do this continuously and read it continuously, the binding will stretch out and it'll get loose, but it won't fall apart. You try that with this book. You try that with this book, and you might get through a couple times going through if you're lucky, and then pages will start falling out because they're just glued in. There's nothing that's holding them to the binding. Um, but yeah, so anyway, that's this week's Trifles. I didn't mean for it to be this long, so I do apologize. But if you found it helpful, then let me know. If there's any other topics that you would like me to sort of spout about, do let me know. So there's your good and bad books for book trifles this week. And again, I want to stress, I'm not like, it's just the good quality and bad quality of the make. I'm not talking anything about the contents of the book or anything like that. It's it's the book as an object, as a thing. And some people don't care about that. All they want to do is read. And to me, it's like, well, that's great. Best thing to do is to get an e-reader if you can read that, either a Kindle or something else, a Nook and so forth. Because if you want something that, if you like having physical things around you and books that will last in nice editions, do look for things like that. And as I say, there are many out there. Folio Society is a great one. Their prices vary, but if you buy old or used ones, depends on the title, you can get them actually quite relatively cheap. See you next time, BookTube.